Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Bernotas, and I am the Director of Instrumental School Methods and Repertoire for Alfred Music. And I'm very excited to be here with one of our amazing string authors and great friends, Bob Phillips. Bob is a renowned, both as an educator and an innovator in string education, with over 27 years teaching experience in the public school classroom as a teacher and a teacher trainer. Bob brings a wealth of knowledge and a great sense of humor to all of his presentations and pretty much any room that he's in. So with that, Bob, thanks so much for joining us for 5 questions with Bob Phillips.
Great to be here, Chris. Thanks for asking me.
My pleasure. All right, let's get right into it with our very first question, which is, who was your most influential or inspiring music teacher and why?
Well, I'm going to give that a three-part answer because I can't do it in one. My three-part answer is this. It would be my undergraduate double bass teacher at University of Michigan, Larry Hurst, because one of the great things I learned from him, besides an astounding amount of technique and music, was he had a great system with kids. He so deeply believed in his students that the level of motivation you had studying with him was just off the chart. Because when you came to a lesson, the worst thing you could imagine in your mind was not being prepared and disappointing him because you weren't living up to this incredibly high expectation he had of us. And he was just an amazing teacher and pedagogue, and I learned so much process from him as well as music. And he's just been a lifelong friend to this day, and obviously one of the great bass teachers of the last 50 years. So that's one. Two, I would say Elizabeth Green, who was my undergraduate string education professor as well as conducting professor. And of course, Elizabeth Green is legendary, having written the Modern Conductor as well as the Principles of Violin Playing, Galamian, the Galamian book. And she was an amazing teacher. I mean, incredibly high expectations, but an incredible process. I mean, everything she did was so well thought out, and she trained us to think like that. So, and she was just an absolute inspiration and just a wonderful person. She was so lovely. Even after I graduated, went back and took, private conducting lessons with her for another 4 or 5 months. And yeah, at the end of that time, she wouldn't let me pay her a thing, not one
Wow.
dime for the lessons. But she was just an amazing person. And then the third part answer would be Bob Culver, who was my graduate string education person. And of course, Bob was a great visionary in string education. Elizabeth Green kind of set the mark. She's the one that helped develop the whole group process teaching thing for strings in the United States. And Bob's the one that I think really brought the idea that you can create artistry in a group process. And he was a great visionary and a great friend and a great mentor. Gave me many early opportunities. So those are my three, and they're just all equally inspirational in my life.
Well, there's also two things that are very common between the three people you just talked about. One is having a very high expectation, and two, being great people. And I think that's something that speaks to our teaching community, which is it's okay to have a high expectation, but also be a nice person. Being demanding and really, expecting the highest level from your students doesn't always equate to being that mean, rigid teacher that isn't nice. So I think
Absolutely.
it's pretty
Yeah.
amazing. And it's always amazing to hear that answer to that question is always so, I don't know, it's nice reminiscing on your teachers and reflecting on that. So, and that's kind of what we all hope our students do someday.
Absolutely.
All right, how about our next question, which is, how did you get your start in the publishing industry? I mean, composing starting is one thing, but getting into the industry of publications is another.
Yeah, it's a very interesting story, actually. So many people, string people at least, would know that I taught in Saline, Michigan, had a very large program, and for many years taught it all by myself, and was teaching 550 kids a day by myself, and then the program got way bigger, and I couldn't do it. But along the way, I was creating materials for the kids. So I was always arranging and writing additional method book things and supplementary things, and at all levels, fifth through high school. So along came one of my friends, Andy Debchinsky, who was doing a doctorate at Michigan at the time. And we were both very interested and captivated by folk music and the world of fiddling. We were country before country was cool, and if you will, and we're one of the people that helped get that whole movement going in the United States, the alt styles movement. And so anyway, Andy, long story short, Andy and I both were doing fiddle arrangements, and various friends would ask us for them, and our wives got really tired of going to the post office for us to mail these things, and they said, you guys need to send this to a publisher because we're not doing this anymore. Okay, you think we should? And they said, yeah. Well, we sent it to 3 publishers, which is a huge publishing mistake, but I didn't know that at the time. I was a rookie. We sent it to 3 people, and we got an acceptance letter from 3 publishers within 48 hours of each other.
Wow.
So now we had an enormous problem.
Yeah.
And that was, who do we say yes to, and who do we make mad? Well, as it turned out, we chose Alfred Publishing, and for a variety of reasons. But anyway, we did that, and because of that, I was working directly with John O'Reilly, who was the editor-in-chief. And in that writing team of Andy and I was the tech person and the finale person. So I'm doing all the back and forth kind of thing. And John just really took an interest in me and befriended me and mentored me and really taught me how to write books. And he of course is an incredibly famous, author of, Strictly Strings and AOA and Yamaha band so many things, plus all his performance music. Well, as a result of that, then we proposed a second book, and he said, okay. So he spent more time with me. And along the way, he was sort of grooming me and mentoring me, and I didn't know it. So I'm writing books. And that's how I really got my start. And that's what led to me becoming an editor at Alfred, and leaving teaching after 28 years to work in the industry for another 15. But it was just a great moment, because it was a great example of somebody, an older person, believing in a younger person and giving them that vision to think, you could do this, you could be good at this. But then at the same time, helping me avoid some of those stupid mistakes that you make as a young person sometimes, when there's a great mentor there to say, you might want to be careful of that. And then once I kind of got into the Alfred fold writing, I met more people, learned more. But a big reason that it all happened, honestly, was because when Finale first came out in 87, I think, I was an early adopter. It was 87 or 88. I bought the first Finale. I had like 5 books that
Yep.
manuals. And you'd wait 20 minutes between screen redraw times and that kind of thing. But I was really into the tech thing. Again, I was country before country was cool. I did the tech thing starting in the 70s. And because I was techie and into it, I had high-level Finale chops, which allowed me to then create a lot of materials quickly and put them in a format that was very easy for a publisher to want to publish.
Right.
Plus all the years of teaching in a variety of teaching environments in terms of levels. So my pedagogy was really solid. But that's how I got started.
That's amazing. And it's another interesting thing to notice about it. It's relationship based, which is very natural for the teaching part of you, being very interactive with students, and then forming this new relationship, and then learning and growing. And you can just see that teacher mentor kind of relationship with John, and naturally developing to get into your next phase.
One of the questions I often get from younger folks is, how did you? They look at my career, and it's pretty varied and vast in a way, and they say, how did you do all those things? Well, one thing at a time, right? And you take opportunities when they come along. I didn't let opportunities go by me. When I was given an opportunity, I took it and I seized it. And I think that's the key. Sometimes, you're going to strike out sometimes, but you're never going to hit a ball that sails past you. If you don't take a swing, you're never going to know. Because I could have been bad at this. I could have been a terrible, and I would have found that out, and that would have been okay.
Yeah.
But you got to take the swing. You got to swing at the ball.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice, and that kind of leads me naturally to the next question, which is a little bit of advice and a little bit of process. So one of the things that we usually chat about in groups of composer people are our process of writing. So maybe you can share with us what your compositional process is, and along the way, maybe some advice for any aspiring composers that might be watching.
Well, like many educational composers, I have no background in terms of formal training in composition. Because honestly, when you go to a conservatory type place like Michigan, it's pretty hard to get access to any of the composition teachers unless you're a composition major. So, which actually I think is a huge mistake. I think every student ought to have a semester of composition in music school, but another subject for another day.
Yeah.
But I think the my process was basically this. I just started writing for my kids and doing things. It might be as simple as I couldn't find any seventh grade duets for when that group of students come in for solo and ensemble and say we want to play a trio, and it's viola, tuba, and mallets, and you go, huh. Let me go search the literature for that. So I did a lot of solo and ensemble arranging. Then I also had a lot. There wasn't very much music for bass at that time for the younger students. So I did a lot of reworking solos for younger students for solo and ensemble. And then I would do arrangements of things that we'd want to play, for various baccalaureate services or graduation or whatever. So I just did a lot of that kind of thing. And then I was always semi-method book writing. I was writing pages to use with a method book, or in some cases I just wrote all my own materials for some years. And so that really got me going in it. Now, when I really needed to start writing something that could be published, I was scared to death. I had no idea whether I could do that or not. And it was always kind of intimidating because composer, the title composer is a little intimidating, I think, for a lot of people. And so anyway, it's a little bit like performance. You put your product out there, you play your performance, and there can be a lot of criticism afterwards.
Oh yeah, sure.
With a piece, you're right. You're going to take some shots, but anyway. But again, mentor. So in the process of doing some early writing, I had written some books with Richard Meyer, and who was the editor at the time, string editor at Alfred. And so I needed to write some things to correlate with one of those early books. And I just said, Richard, if I write something, will you look at it? He said, sure. So everything I wrote for those first series of years, I would vet with Richard, and we would just sit and talk about it. And he'd say, well, did you think about this, this, and this? Why'd you do that? What was this about? And I learned a lot. And then once you are a composer, once you start writing, you start looking at all the music you're teaching differently. Suddenly you look at that, whether it's an educational score or Beethoven or whatever, you look at it, you go, that's really interesting what he did there or she did there, whoever it is. And I think all of a sudden you look at that world differently, which is why I think all students should be taught composition. Because once you get into that, you realize, kind of what's going on underneath the surface, if you will. And one of the projects I used to do with kids is I would give them, a phrase of like Mozart, bum, ba bum, ba 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 bum. Okay, now you write a new ending to that.
Right.
The day he wrote it, he wrote bum, ba bum, ba 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 bum. Doesn't mean that's the way it had to be. Because I think the other thing is we kind of venerate these pieces sometimes and think that, they're holy ground. Well, that's just what that person did that day. If Beethoven took another swing at the Seventh Symphony, he might have changed some things. Who knows?
Yeah.
So I think that's how I got started. Really, is that way, and then with Richard mentoring me.
And I think there's in that story and that development of your compositional progress, there's a lot of advice. I think the first thing that I'm pulling out of it is working with those small groups, those solos, the small ensembles, and you kind of learn a lot about single line voicing and how the instruments work and how they work with one another, building your way to an ensemble and a piece. So I think learning that the ins and outs of how things work is part of it. And then the second, and probably even more important or equally important, is the collaboration aspect of how things work. Opening yourself up, here you go, take a look, let me know what I did.
Well, and I think knowing the instruments really well is huge. Like for me, my important part of my process is I play every note of every line on the instrument it's written for with strings. If I
Yeah,
get the winds, now I got to be a little more creative. But I actually, if it's written for viola, I play it on the viola because I want to know not only what it sounds like, how it interacts with the other parts, but I want to know what it feels like. So I want to sit behind the stand and go, if I were a viola player sitting there and this was my experience for the next 6 weeks, what would it be?
yeah,
I think that's the difference between being an educational composer and a professional composer, if you will, or I guess we're professional, but it's writing for professional groups.
yeah,
Is that I'm really concerned about how this is used in a teaching environment, and is there equal great musical content for all players, so that I can then teach that way, and I can differentiate because I do have everybody has great content.
yeah. That's all fantastic information. And I think that global view really does help kind of give everybody a little bit of a perspective of composition, technique, and also purpose. That's awesome. And of course, your opportunities, as you mentioned, and they come your way, you got to take a swing. And those opportunities for you to travel all over the place, guest conducting, many conferences, in services, all kinds of appearances have brought you all over the place. So, my question number 4 is, having all these travels under your belt, which of these have been among your favorite destinations?
Well, of course, it's a hard question because there's a lot of places. I think of the places because of the people. And of course, oftentimes when you're at conventions, you're in a convention hall,
Mm-hmm.
which once you've been in one, you've been in all of them.
Yeah.
And so the city, sometimes you don't see as much as you would really sort of like to. But in terms of, some really interesting places, I'd have to say Australia is a favorite. Love Australia, love the people. It's just a great, interesting place. Again, outside of the United States, I say the Canadian Rockies. We had one clinic I did in on the Sunshine Coast, on the extreme west coast of Canada. Was really, 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 really cool. So a lot of interesting places. But again, I think more about who the people are in those places. My Georgia friends or my Arizona friends or my Washington friends or my Missouri friends,
Yeah.
you get to know everybody so well through the years, and of course done awful lot of clinics for 30, 40 years. So and you get my daughters kind of kid me about that sometimes, that my wife and we have a lot of friends, just a lot of them don't live in Michigan. And so we found this during this time of COVID. Of course, what we've done a lot of Zoom, like happy hours, where you just
Sure.
4 or 5 o'clock get some cheese, iced tea or whatever, and we get on Zoom with friends for an hour, and it brings back all those memories of those various locations and places, and because I just met so many great teachers around this country.
Yeah, that's
So
kind
many
of, it's
inspiring.
probably an unfair question. It's kind of like asking you to pick your favorite twin daughter, right? You
Yeah,
can't do
exactly.
that. They're all
Right.
your favorites because of,
Yeah.
but again, it's another commonality. It's relationship, because you have a relationship with both just the places and the people, and it's very personal, and
Yeah. Yeah.
that's pretty amazing.
Right.
All right, our fifth and final question, which is, other than music, although it could be musical, what is something that you love to do that people might not know about?
Well, um, so I'm kind of a music nerd that way. Um, few years ago, I'll start this way. A few years ago, I had a wonderful surprise. My wife and I were invited back to Saline, where I taught for 27 years. And they did this tribute called Hats Off to Pam and Bob. And they what they did is they had all different kinds of groups play, as well as students flew in from all over the country. It was kind of a Mr. Holland's Opus moment, and they
Hmm.
played some pieces and all that, some of my music, whatever. And they kind of packed out this auditorium, and it was very fun. But the superintendent came out, the current superintendent, said, "Well, I thought I'd read you what Bob wrote when he applied for this job all those years ago." And in that statement, I said that, I talked about my passion for music and for music teaching, and that music was my vocation, but also my avocation. So this is sort of a full-time thing for me. So I would say that in terms of my hobbies, in terms of things I like to do outside, of course, the main thing I like to do is spend time with my wife, my children, and my grandchildren, most of them live under 2 miles away from us. And one family doesn't, but they're only about 3 hours. So I spend a lot of time with them. But my other passion musically is I developed a late in life passion for playing the mandolin, the mandola, the mandocello, the octave mandolin. So I play in a mandolin orchestra, as well as I play in a really cool mandolin quartet. And so I do a lot of folk music and that kind of thing. And I've spent my whole life in two worlds: the classical school world, but then also I created a whole alt styles world within that program. So I had both there, but then both in the classical world and in the sort of alt styles world. And I'm pretty well known in both areas. So I've had a lot of great times in the folk music slash, semi rock, a little bit mariachi, but I love bluegrass, I love folk, I love all those kinds of things. So.
That's awesome, and I think that some people might not have known the mandolin story, and I think it's great, and I
Yeah, you
love.
see them in the background. Some of them are in the
I
background.
know. I'm sure that people are going to try to zoom in on this and see what has he
Yeah.
got back there. And they actually, being lucky enough to have seen a couple of them live, at least one of them live, they're beautiful. They're just visually stunning instruments. So
Well,
it's
like a
pretty.
lot of string people, I love beautiful instruments and I love wood. And because, I used to tell students, you have to remember this is a work of art. It's not just an instrument, it's a work of art. And one of the questions I always raise with kids is, I said, well, often we hear about a violin that's 200 years old or 300 years old, and you think that's really cool. Who all played this? But my question for you is, who's going to play your violin in the future? You might have your grandchildren, your great grandchildren, your great grandchildren might play this violin someday. Isn't that cool to think about? So I love the aesthetics. I love talking to violin makers and guitar makers and mandolin makers and
Oh, that is
the
awesome.
process of making instruments in beautiful wood. Oh, it's just so artistic.
That's fantastic. Bob, I always love talking to you. And, personally, I appreciate your friendship and Pam and your amazing family. I think that's something I admire about you and your family. We share that kind of appreciation of that time and all that. And I want to thank you so much for sharing your time with us. And hopefully, anybody that watches this is going to get a little behind the scenes glimpse to see all that goes into Bob Phillips. He's very multifaceted and just as kind as you can get. So
Thank you, Chris, and it's an honor to talk to you in particular, because you're such a great composer and a great leader at Alfred, and I really appreciate what you do. And I just want to say thanks to all my music teacher friends out there around the world right now, because boy, it's just amazing the great work everybody's doing during this time of COVID. And you're so creative, you're so inspirational, and it's just really amazing to watch and be part of. And I just thank you all for what you're doing and keeping this art form alive and just being with kids when they need it most. So thank you.
absolutely, I could not agree more. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Until next time, take care.